Now, it's common knowledge that Rome was the single greatest civilization to ever exist, and they did no wrong whatsoever. However, even the best can have their minor setbacks now and again. Which is why today, dear listeners, I will be talking about the first defeat ever suffered by the Roman Republic. That being the Battle of Allia. The Battle of Allia occurred around 390 BC between the Roman Republic and the Senones, a Gallic tribe led by a chieftain named Brennus. What happened was, the Senones approached the town of Clusium in central Italy, because, according to Livy, they had been called at the behest of a man named Arnus, because he had a bone to pick with the son of a man named Lucumio, who was the king of the city and who may or may not have been dead by now depending on which historian you ask. And why exactly would Arnus go about calling an entire foreign army to the city in order to settle a personal grievance? Well, that's because he claimed that Lucumio's son had, quote, debauched his wife, which actually gets even weirder when you find out that Arnus may or may not have adopted Lucumio's son after Lucumio may or may not have died. Whew. Telenovela. Now, according to the account by Dionysius of Halicarnassus, the grieving Arnus went to Gaul to sell wine, olives, and figs, which I guess was the ancient Roman equivalent of an eat, pray, love. Now, the Gauls had allegedly never seen such exotic goods before and asked Arnus where he got them. And this gave our ye old sad boy Arnus a little idea on just how to get even with a certain wife debaucherer in a way that would definitely not spiral wildly out of control. Oh, these goodies? Yeah, they just came from this weird land to the south where it's warm and the ground is fertile, unlike my ex-wife, but definitely don't go attacking there, especially not this place called Clusium, located exactly here on this map, because nobody knows how to fight there and you drive them all out so easily that it'd just be unfair, wink wink. Granted, this probably isn't true because Dionysius states that the Gauls were in Gaul at the time, while most historians agree that the Senones had settled in northern Italy for some time at this point and may have helped found the city of Mediolanum, now modern-day Milan, thereby establishing the eternal link between Goths and fashion. And I will say, it's nice to see Dionysius keeping up the age-old tradition of ancient historians flat-out lying for the drama. Really makes my job more interesting. What is known, however, is that Arnus got the Senones to the gates of Clusium as backup to settle a marital problem, but the Clusians, understandably feeling threatened by a barbarian army at their gates, called Rome for help. The Romans, who were their benefactors, basically went, "Alright, what's the sob story?" and waved it off by telling the Senones to just relax for a little bit, but this video wouldn't be here if something didn't go wrong. Look, just don't attack Clusium or else we'll have to defend this dump, so let's talk Galapavo to see if we can't come to an agreement. Well, I mean, that sounds fair. Just have them give us a little land and we'll be, alright, we're doing this. Wait, what? And a battle, a small one mind you, immediately commenced, which resulted in a Roman ambassador killing a Senone chieftain, which, shockingly, was a bit of a faux pas in those days as ambassadors were supposed to be neutral. Now, this would have been a bad enough look on its own, however, this ambassador and two others were the sons of one Marcus Fabius Ambustus, one of Rome's most powerful aristocrats at the time. So, when the ambassadors of the Senones arrived in Rome, they demanded the three brothers be handed over to face punishment for violating what I was assumed was the not yet Geneva Convention. But since their family was so powerful, the Roman senators hesitated to punish them and instead opted to elect the brothers as military tribunes, which granted them immunity under Roman law. A practice I'm glad we as a society have moved away from in current era. However, shockingly, this had the opposite of a diffusing effect on the situation when the Gallic ambassadors came to offer terms. So, hand over those three for violating the code of honor and laws of nations, and we'll put this all behind us. Ooh, we would, but we just elected them to the position of tribune, making them legally untouchable for a year, so... Alright, we're doing this. Wait, what? Feeling a little insulted by the fact that the men they sought to punish were being suddenly honored, the Gauls decided to put Rome to its first great test. And like all tests, the Romans made no effort to prepare for what they knew was coming, mainly because the Gauls moved on Rome with such haste that the Romans barely had enough time to muster enough troops to meet them in the field. The battle itself took place where the Allia River meets the Tiber in Italy, about 16 kilometers or 10 to 11 miles north of Rome, and pro tip, if you ever get attacked when you're backed by a river, something really bad is about to happen. Now, it's important to remember that Romans at this time weren't the professional citizen soldiers who conquered the entire Mediterranean world. These guys were mostly barely trained levies who functioned more like Greek hoplites with spears in phalanx formation, rather than the manipular legionaries with scutum and gladius Rome would become famous for later on. However, the Romans were able to pull together an army, but, according to Livy, they were allegedly still outnumbered. Now, that in and of itself wouldn't be a huge problem if they played their cards right, but you, dear viewer, have read the title of this video. The Roman troops didn't set up camp or even bother to build a defensive rampart, nor did they even divine the gods before the battle, which clearly was the olive that broke the branch here. To compensate for their lack of numbers, and to avoid being outflanked, they overextended their formation's wings and placed their least experienced reserves on a hilltop to the right. And, as anyone my age will tell you, when you overextend without preparing yourself, something is gonna get painfully pulled real quick. And pull something the Gauls did, because Brennus correctly suspected that those reserves would be used to encircle his troops after he closed with the main body, so he sent his best warriors up the hill to engage them. Now, remember when I said that the Romans were fighting in phalanx formation? Well, this battle right here is why that strategy was phased out. You see, phalanxes are nigh unbreakable head-on, they're practically immovable, but that also means they're damn near immobile, only being able to advance in one direction without breaking the line. To compensate for this, a phalanx would need light infantry or cavalry guarding its flanks, and if the enemy got behind you, you were basically screwed. The overly tight nature of the phalanx also meant that if one part of the formation was struggling, it was a lot harder to reinforce them than it is with a manipular legion or even a standard line formation. And as some of you will note, this flanking of the phalanx is actually what the Greeks lost to at the Battle of Thermopylae. So, upon seeing that battle was indeed happening at this battlefield, the left flank allegedly panicked and threw down their spears, which caused a total rout of the entire Roman line, with anyone not fleeing being killed outright, or drowning in the Tiber River because of their armor's weight. Talk about the weight of history, am I right, fellas? Those who didn't drown actually managed to drag themselves to the nearby city of Veii, which Rome had only recently conquered, and I can't imagine seeing the guys who had beaten you not long ago crawl in soaking wet and presumably crying was good optics. However, many Romans would actually flee there, with some proposing that Rome be abandoned outright in exchange for Veii, which obviously didn't happen, but man, crazy to think. What's important, however, is the fact that these soldiers were in Veii, which was notably not Rome. Hey, so if I'm in Veii, and you're in Veii, and he drowned in the Tiber, then who's defending Rome? Uh-oh. Now, the nitty-gritty gets debated between historians, none of whom were actually there, mind you, but the consensus takeaway is that 1. The Romans' worst troops were on a hill to the right, who were then met by the Celts' best. 2. This caused the left wing of the Roman formation to break first, and 3. Many of the retreating Romans drowned in the Tiber River, leaving Rome virtually undefended. In fact, many historians agree that their victory was so easy that the Gauls kinda just milled around for a while in shock after the battle, because no way it was that easy. But spoiler alert, it was. They actually started stabbing dead bodies, expecting a trick of some kind, but nope. It really was just that simple. People talk about Hannibal Barca's Tour de Italy until they're out of breath, but guys, he never even made it into Rome. Meanwhile, people just ignore Brennus and the Great 390 Thunder Run. Now, the astute among you will have noted that I haven't made any mention of troop numbers until now, and that's because the troop numbers and casualty figures for this battle are really fuzzy, ranging from 15,000 to 40,000 on the Roman side, and 12,000 to 70,000 on the Gallic side. Now, many would chalk that up to historians in ancient times having different motives and what message they wanted to portray. However, I think the reason there's such a big gap in the numbers variance is that if me getting humiliated in the field also led to what was about to come, I'd start lying about things too. And that's because the consequences of this defeat was the first ever sacking of Rome. And I want to remind everyone how exactly we got here. With a cheating scandal. Don't say history never gave you anything. Brennus and his forces then entered the city virtually unopposed and went from house to house looting and burning the nearly empty city, because everyone had either run off to Veii or were camped out on the famous Roman hills, most notably the Capitoline and Aventine hills. The only people actually still in the city were those who had to be left behind, like the elderly or the infirm, and, most notably, some of the leading men of Rome, who very bravely opted to stay behind in the Forum and with their estates. Among those who stayed behind was one Marcus Papirius, an elderly patrician who the Gauls found seated in the Forum. According to legend, the Senones were initially hesitant to even approach him, but one of them eventually mustered up the courage to stroke his beard, something that was considered taboo and deeply disrespectful in that time. At this, Papirius allegedly struck the Gaul on the head with his ivory staff, an act of defiance that would not only see him killed, but also begin the sacking of the city. If you ever wonder why Roman history before this period, such as the monarchical period and the founding of the city, is such a hazy, quasi-mythological blur, this sacking and the burning is the reason why. After this, the Gauls moved on the Capitoline Hill, where the defenders of the city were hard at work, not defending the city. Hey, do you think we should do something? The city's on fire. Shut up, Quintus, they'll be fine. I mean, we should support them somehow, right? Fine. You can do it! Now, credit to the Romans, they did manage to hold out as far as we can tell. After initial attacks resulted in the first pushback the Gauls had gotten since this had all began, Brennus simply surrounded the hill and decided to wait them out. Eventually, though, the Romans agreed to just bribe the Gauls into leaving. Mission accomplished. I'm sure that won't establish a horrible precedent. However, during the negotiations, the Gauls brought out a scale so the Romans could weigh out the 1,000 pounds of gold they had agreed on for them to leave the city. However, the Gauls had stacked the proverbial deck by tipping the literal scale, and when the Romans called them on it, Brennus famously tossed his sword onto the weights and said, "Vae victus," or "Woe to the vanquished," effectively meaning, what are you going to do about it? And most historians agree the answer to that was a resounding, not much. Now, note how I say most historians. That's because here's where the story gets well and truly weird, and that's because of a man named Camillus. You see, Camillus was, according to legend, a Roman general who had previously been named dictator during a crisis, but had since been exiled because, according to Livy, he was just too virtuous, since he didn't want to repopulate the conquered city of Veii and spared other cities from being plundered. And when he was exiled on his way out of the city, he cried up to the gates of Rome stating that one day a crisis shall befall you and you will need my help once again. And wouldn't you know it, according to our boy Livy, he caught wind of the noble Romans fighting to the last on the hill with all the strength they had, and swept in at the end just as the ransom negotiations were being finished and declared them invalid. He would then bravely engage the dastardly barbarians and, as Livy wrote, the slaughter was total. Their camp was captured and not even the messenger survived to report the disaster, so don't bother asking for any alternative opinions. This is almost certainly pure cope, and it should make pretty clear that Livy isn't the most reliable source when it comes to early Roman history because of his need for storytelling and honestly insane level of bias towards Roman order and virtue. But there are times when he's all you got, so when in Rome, I guess. Livyisms aside, this defeat changed Roman doctrine forever. It was one of the reasons they abandoned the hoplite phalanx, and by 316 BC, had adopted the Manipular Legion they would conquer the Mediterranean world with. It also showed the Romans that it was better to be always on the offensive, attacking and conquering any perceived threat to Rome rather than reacting to them and letting things get this bad, which is the doctrine that would carry them from Italy to Germania to Egypt and beyond. Most importantly, however, it convinced the Romans that sitting out in the open may not be the optimal defensive doctrine for a city, leading to the construction of the first ever defensive wall around Rome, because hey, better late than never. Part of this wall, called the Severian Wall, can actually still be visited today, showing us that the walls you put up to deal with trauma caused by cheating and a goth never truly go away. And that, my dear viewers, is how the Roman Republic got their ass kicked for the first, and certainly not the last time. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. This one was a lot of fun to work on, and it is officially the first script I ever wrote for this channel, so I really hope you guys liked it. But I must of course give credit to my team, as this video was made in collaboration with my art director Love Chaotica. Check out her Twitter and her webcomic Inside the Lines down below, as well as my sketch artist Drago Nerd, whose Twitter can also be found down below. And of course, a huge thank you to my wonderful patrons, foremost being my 4 consuls, Battle Brother, Dr. Emboss, Knight, and Nicholas Kordaluski. And of course I can't forget my wonderful censors, Frisco Corvinus, Jan Timo Lobner, Lorenzo, and Rion Autrom. Furthermore, this channel would not be here were it not for my excellent praetors, 3x01, Crowmen, Demonic, David Nori, Faye Evolved, Fran, High Marshal Guts, Inside Chaos, Keel Reed, Cumrate, Omega Chris 112, Ricardo DeCamp, Wubbly, and Zephyr Brown. Many thanks as well to my tribunes of the plebes named here below, as well as all of my adiles and quaestors. Hail to you all, and I will see you in the next video.